Good afternoon. Welcome to Erev Israel. I'm Avraham Shira. And Erev Shabbat, we have a very fascinating story from the Tikunei Zohar, but it's not really a story like any other story. It's really a historical metaphor of the war of good and evil between the warrior, the princess, and the weapon, of course, prayer. So the beginning, Rabbi Shimon opens up his discourse, and I'm going to run through this quickly in English because it saves us time, and tells us that the upper beings, which are usually angels, and the forces of creation, were making ready their weapons for war against the great snake, the snake that lives in the mountains and great mountains. And those are the dark places of the other side. They can compare to the mountains, they're compared to be the ocean, they're compared to many things in creation, depending on the context and where we're talking about on the tree of life. And this great snake, well, he killed Adam, and the Zohar tells us all the generations that came after him, because that's one of his jobs. Now, killing means literally taking the soul out of the body. And where it goes depends on the achievement or the accomplishment of that soul. So it's not like a bloody battle as you might think of, but it is a battle between good and evil, between life and death. Because the holy soul always wants to go back to Hashem. The lower soul wants to stay in this world. And guess where we are? In between both of those. And that's why sometimes we feel like we live forever, and sometimes we feel like we don't want to live another minute. And we can feel both those extremes of feeling in one mind, in one heart, in one moment, or one moment next to each other, shall we say. The part of us wants to live forever because we will, and part of us doesn't want to deal with this world anymore, so we want to leave, which we call death. Okay, beginning. So an announcement went out. On every day there was an announcement. When that snake was preparing to destroy, to kill, to take a soul out, and he would leave, and as he prepared himself to go out from those great mountains, those hidden places, the places that we don't perceive, the hiding of this power, and he's after the daughter of the king. The daughter of the king is the metaphor of the higher soul of every person. The daughter of the king, that special part of us that won't die, that does know Hashem, that wants to do the will of God always. And that's where exactly the Yetzer Hara, the other side, the evil one, is trying to attack us. That very pure part of us that draws infinite life into this world. And he goes on and tells us the Bat Melech is also the metaphor for prayer. Where does the prayer rest? Where does the prayer hide? Where is the princess in every fairy tale? In the great tower. And he tells us, Migdal Oz Shem Hashem, that the fortress of strength is the name of God. That God's name is not just 4 letters or 5 letters. It's a fortress of power. The Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey, those 4 letters represent a tower where the princess resides, where the holy part of us is hidden in that name. So you see, when we bless God's name, when we do mitzvot in God's name, when we meditate on God's name, we're actually trying to get the princess out of that tower, out of that name. But it's a powerful tower. And the Migdal Oz, Shem Hashem, also you can understand it as a pathway. Because the next verse says, Hashem bo yarutz tzaddik v'nisgav. There, in that tower, in that series of staircases of God's name, Yarut tzaddik v'niskav. There the tzaddik will run and be elevated and hidden and taken up on high. So if you're righteous enough, you can enter the tower of God's name, you can climb the staircases of God's name, and you can reach the ultimate level, the divine presence in your soul, which connects to all the others. Because remember one thing, my friends, please remember. Your spark of God is my spark of, it's all one God, it's all one divine presence. Now, of course, you have that peace inside you, but that peace inside you is also connected to the peace inside me. So that there we find our oneness in that eternal, universal, infinite spark. And it's broken into billions and billions of tiny sparks of all the people of the human race. Okay, so when you're going after Hashem, you're climbing that tower, you're entering the tower of letters, of sounds, of vowels, and all the other details of that journey. You're not just doing it for you, because all the others are connected to you. And you're pulling them along. And every time we make a step up, we pull others with us. And God forbid, every time we make a step down, others get pulled down. In the meantime, there is the faithful shepherd. And he comes. And he comes with many flocks. Right? And the flocks, of course, are, well, of course, they're called sheep and goats and etc. But really, they are the angels and the mitzvot that he's done in his service of Hashem, this faithful shepherd. And he has a staff in his hand. Now this is the staff of Moses that is given to every faithful shepherd that was originally created Erev Shabbat. This time right now. Right before Shabbat enters, there were 10 awesome, miraculous things that were created. And one of them is the staff of Moses, and that's not a staff that sits still. That's a staff that Moses used to open the sea, but it's the same staff that Jacob used to open up the Jordan River. And that staff will be revealed again. And that staff contains God's infinite name. Now, this faithful shepherd lifted up his eyes to the tower. Right? It's an internal tower. It's happening deep inside your soul. And he lifts up his eyes there. And he sees a man who cannot speak. He's righteous, but he's deaf. Not deaf, excuse me. He's mute. And he was sitting on that tower. So there's a deaf tzaddik who, again, a mute tzaddik, usually mute and deaf go together, right? And he's sitting on the tower, and this faithful shepherd comes and sees him. So we have two tzaddikim in the story now. Who are they? What are they? So he was sitting on the tower, the one who could not speak, and he had a bow in his hand, and he was shooting arrows at the snake. But the Zohar tells us, his arrows did not have power against the snake. So this is a state that every tzaddik has to go through, where you pray and your prayer doesn't work. You pray and you cry and you scream and nothing happens. That is a state on the way to the higher level of tzaddik, where your prayer does penetrate into the tower, into God's name, to save the princess. Zehu Pizer Gadol, and this is the one of the cantillation, the musical notes of the Torah, is called a Pizer Gadol, and it's a symbol that appears on the letters, and the idea of Pizer is to spread out, to push away the power of these arrows. And in the Nachash, he wasn't worried about it. He spread them out. And the keshet, the arrow, the bow that you shoot the arrow is your mouth and the tongue. Because the tongue and the mouth are the real tools that send the arrows into the heart and kill the snake. Eventually, ultimately. And this is called the Lashon HaPeh, the tongue in the mouth. And the egos, which is really a walnut, is another metaphor in the Zohar here, is part of the bow and the arrow. Now, he calls it the chut hashaneh zo shepeh ad sefa, and the chut hashaneh, amazingly, the red thread that you see at Kever Rachel that they hang, and it's a segula. Well, that red thread also corresponds to the red line of the lips, from which the prayer emerges. So the Zohar is comparing all these parts of the bow and the arrow, and that's the string of the bow that shoots the words into the heavens. And, well, depending on who the tzaddik is, those arrows will do what they do. This is the chut hashaneh, and this is the lips, and this is the thread of the bow. And some opinions call it the chesed itself. And this is the weapon that the righteous would use to send forth his words of prayer into the snake. But the snake was not affected by this tzaddik's prayer. Now, that's a terrible situation if you have a righteous person who's trying, to defeat the evil. Now, that's the evil within, the evil without, the cosmic level, the private level, the personal level, the national level. There are many, many spheres of what we call evil. And prayer has the power to penetrate them. But sometimes it's not enough power. But he was not weak, the Zohar says, and therefore his prayers, his arrows, were not able to penetrate the snake. But rather he was not yet complete. So on the path of the spiritual, we are looking for completion. Now, it's not the same as being the biggest guy with the biggest muscles, right? And the smartest guy with the biggest brain. And the guy with the most sentiment or sentient feeling for others, compassion. We need all those three to do this work. But the one who is shalem, who has all the traits in abundance, he's the one who has the power to send the arrow. So it doesn't mean that one is weak. He's not simply weak, because in our mind that connotation doesn't serve the metaphor properly. Rather, he's not yet complete. So the arrow doesn't have the power. If we don't have the Torah behind us, which is the mind, and we don't have the heart behind us, which is the focus of the prayer, right? And we don't have the physical strength itself for prayer, then the arrows won't do the job. And that's the lower tzaddik. And then there's the upper tzaddik who reaches the completion of all those powers. And then his arrows have the power to go out and attack and destroy the evil to the degree why? So that we can free the princes from the palace of God's name. See, because God's name is not just 4 letters, my friends. The palace of God's name is where the light of creation is stored and hidden, that was put away for the tzaddikim until these times, the end of days. Okay. Until the great moment when the Ro'eh Ne'eman, the faithful shepherd, comes, and he takes the chetz, the arrow, and he shoots the arrow one after the other in his prayers until they've performed, the arrow does, and it attacks where? The liver of the snake. Now, what's that telling us? The liver, the organ that we all have that purifies blood and takes out the impurities? Well, that's the whole point of the prayer. Because if you take out the impurities of your soul, what's left is the holy. What's left is your divine soul. So that shooting the arrow of this great faithful shepherd, he's like, You can't kill an angel. All you can do is purify him until he leaves you alone, or he becomes your servant. And that's another Torah. We will have a teaching that is very important to understand how the angels can be transformed from evil ones to good ones. And that's part of the big work. But here we're just talking about the idea of the purification of this angel of death by shooting out his liver, because the liver is the place where anger is stored. And the original anger of creation was the snake wanted to be God. The snake wanted God's chair. Now, wait a minute. We're talking about the forces of creation from the beginning of time, long before there was any planets and there were any people. We're talking about the primordial forces God used to create this amazing universe. And at that time, there was an angel created that said, well, I want to be God. And that's a spark. Let's be clear. That angel had a spark in him of God's own pride. Because all of us carry a spark of, I want to be God. And then very quickly, we learned that we're not God, that we're part of him, that he's the master and we're the servant and not vice versa. But there's that part of ego in us that we want to be the master and want everybody else to be the servant. And that's the part of us that's to be purified and fixed. And that's the part that the snake didn't fix, this primordial envious creature. It's really primordial envy itself. And the angels are envious of man because we have the freedom to find and serve Hashem and to do his mitzvot and to learn his Torah and to pray to him to transform creation. Whereas angels cannot transform. They can only serve man or God or evil if they're unfortunately given the chance to. So he's going after the snake and after the snake's liver, and the snake's liver is called Samech Mem Aleph Lamed, which is one of the names of the other side that we don't use. We don't say it all out loud, but people write it. And he's called El Acher, the other God. You see how high a level to be called other God still means you're up there on the top of the pantheon of these spiritual forces, because that's where his foundation is. In the mind of Hashem, there is this spark that allows a being to be created that will want to replace him. Now that's a high level of humility. If you're the infinite being and you're allowed, and you create a being that will replace you, or wants to replace you, I should say. But that's how far God's humility and his fairness goes. And because of this, the liver is the seat of anger, and the place, and next to it is the mara, there's the gallbladder, and these two organs are working together to process the blood and purify. Now, also there we find what we call the Sam Hamavet, the drug of death. See, because it's like a drug, because it changes your mind, it affects the way you think. The elixir of death, it's called. But it's a drug. It goes away. There is no such thing as death unless you're one of the very few people in creation that were decreed that your soul will be wiped out completely. Because we don't really die. We just get transported from place to place, depending on what we do. So it's called the Samamavet, the taste of death, the drug of death, which makes you leave your body, but you're still you. You just don't have a body anymore. So you're going to find yourself in the midst of whatever world you created here, you're going to have there. And so now the Zohar is going to go on to teach us further that this Samamavet, the spirit of death itself, has a male and a female side. And the female side is called the tail. And so he's going to go on and explain to us that there are two people inside every person. The good and the evil. The one that wants to do God's will and the one that wants to go against. And the place we see this most apparent is how a person behaves sexually. because that's where he accesses the power of life and sends the power of life into the world, whether into his wife and produces holy, beautiful children, or it's sent off into giving power to forces that we don't even want to talk about. And she's called the maidservant, not the princess. So we're back to the princess and the maidservant, the dark side and the light side of the power to give life, or to influence, if you will. And these are connected, both the spleen, I said gallbladder before, but it's the spleen and the liver, because those two organs are channeling these powers into our body. And this what the Zohar calls the tail, the zanav, which is this spleen, which is that extra organ, if you will, attached beside the liver. Well, it's attached to man. And this is why we have a tradition in the Midrash that says that in the beginning there was a tail. And he says, because there was a form of man with the tail, and there was a form of man without the tail. So the tail is the symbol of the transformation of a good person to an evil one, or vice versa, an evil person who becomes good. That the tail is either gained or lost. And the one with the tail is called evil. And he's the one who's taken from the tree of life, and he's attached to the tree of death, which is metaphorically the tree of knowledge of good and evil, meaning that if I think of good and evil, I created a duality. And that duality splits the mind between life and death. But there really is no death, my friends. And Shabbat, the Shabbat that we're about to enter, is a tiny spark of that future world where there will be no more death. Humanity will be lifted to a completely different level, a level that the science fiction movies have not touched. And we're on the way, whether it's this year or this decade or this millennium or this epoch, however many years it takes, humanity will evolve to that level. And we want to be part of that. And we'd be part of that through the Torah, through the mitzvot, and through attaching ourselves to this faithful shepherd, the tzaddik, Rabbi Nachman. In our generation, some people feel Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, all the way back, there was always a tzaddik of the generation that did this work for the Jewish people. So there are many messianic figures in the Jewish religion, but the one that people always talk about is the one who's going to build the temple. Okay, so that's part of the process. But the big process is removing that snake, removing his tail, removing his poison, removing his power of illusion over our mind, that we can see our own connection to infinity and eternity. So God should bless you with a taste of that this Shabbat. And you have to get there through prayer and through meditation and through dedication. And we can, and we will succeed. Shabbat Shalom.